Welcome to the Tech Humanist Show, a multimedia format program exploring how data and technology shape the human experience. I'm your host, Kate O'Neill.
Hello, humans. I'm Kate O'Neill, and this is the Tech Humanist Show. Well, the United States of America is turning 250 years old, and many people aren't sure how to feel about it. After all, democracy seems endangered. Climate change is accelerating. AI is restructuring how institutions make decisions, and data centers have become local political flashpoints. The infrastructure of how we process information and make sense of ourselves as a country is being rebuilt in real time, and not a whole lot of people seem to have agreed on the blueprints. And anniversaries like this can also turn into purity tests. You're either expected to celebrate without critique or to critique without love. But the truth is messier, as it so often is, and more interesting. A 250th birthday is really a question about the next 250 years. What kind of country are we trying to be? What do we need to be able to do together? And what stories and systems make that possible? And hint, that's where this whole discussion becomes instructive as an allegory for technology projects and organizational systems at all scales, and how they intersect with and shape human experiences. So what does it really mean to think about this milestone through a strategic lens and through the all-important human-centered one? My guest today will help add some perspective. Patrick Doherty is a strategist and consultant who has spent his career asking what it would really mean for the United States to have a long-term plan. He's co-author of The New Grand Strategy, a blueprint that ties together economic renewal, climate resilience, and national security into a coherent vision for the country's next century. He's worked at the intersection of macroeconomics and geopolitics, translating big picture trends into practical pathways for prosperity and stability. Patrick brings that rare ability to zoom out, connect the dots, and ask what a country actually needs to build for the next century, not just the next cycle. And at 250 years old, that question has never been more urgent or more unresolved. Brandyn Keating is the founder and CEO of YOUnify, spelled YOUnify, and a longtime social entrepreneur who has spent 2 decades building bridges in some of the most polarized environments in American life. She's led national-level political organizing and campaigns and helped design and oversee rigorous experiments on what actually reduces polarization and rebuilds trust across deep divides. At YOUnify and in prior work, Brandyn's focus has been on measurable, scalable ways to repair our civic fabric, treating trust not as a vague feeling, but as an actionable metric that can be strengthened. In a conversation about whether the US can still do big things together at 250 years old, inside an information environment that seems almost engineered to make that harder, Brandyn brings grounded evidence that communities can relearn how to cooperate and a roadmap for how that transformation actually happens. They are incredible experts. This is a wonderful conversation, so deep and rich with information, and I'm so gratified to be able to share it with you. So let's get into it. All right, well, first of all, you guys, thank you so much for joining me on the Tech Humanist Show. It is a delight to see your faces.
Thank you, Kate. Good to see you.
Delight to see you.
This is really a treat. Ever since we met, I've just been kind of almost dreaming about having this conversation with the two of you on this show. And I just want to jump right in because it's been so ever since we met, Patrick, I've been reading your fantastic book, The New Grand Strategy. So I want to start with you. That book makes the case that America hasn't really had a coherent grand strategy since the Cold War ended. But for listeners who've never had to think in those terms, what does grand strategy actually mean in plain language? And so what's a country doing when it's doing this well?
Yeah, the simple definition of grand strategy is it's the alignment of our economic engine, our governing institutions, and our foreign policy to meet a great national or global challenge. We've done it 3 times in the past in the United States, for the Civil War, for World War II, and for the Cold War. And it's long past time that we should have been doing one. And I got the privilege of being able to work during the Obama administration when I was at New America Foundation with the Office of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, looking at new conceptions of grand strategy for the country.
Yeah, that and from the book is so you and your co-authors point back to the Eisenhower era as the last time the US really had this kind of strategic coherence. What I'm also thinking about though is that the Eisenhower era also produced the interstate highway system, so a piece of physical infrastructure that literally shaped how Americans moved and worked and thought about the country. I'm wondering though, when you look at the 21st century equivalents, energy grids, broadbands, AI systems, digital public infrastructure, do those belong at the center of any coherent grand strategy today, like the way highways once did?
Yeah, for sure. One of the dominant things about grand strategy is that it's the level of planning that we do at a generational scale, right? And so it's always got to meet this generation's and the next generation's challenges that we see coming at us, right? Eisenhower was able to do that really well with strategic coherence around the Cold War, right? And he needed to get our economic engine to do the heavy lifting the same way we were the arsenal of democracy in World War II, and the economy did the heavy lifting. Eisenhower had to figure out how to do that, and extending the highway system was the way to get suburban growth and a single common market together to provide the economic heft and coherence to win that long-term, decade-long challenge struggle with the Soviet Union. So when we're looking forward, we got to think about what are the challenges today and what's the infrastructure and systems that we need to win this new generation's challenge.
Yeah. And one of the challenges, it seems like, goes right to you, Brandyn. I mean, you've spent 2 decades thinking about trust and polarization from the ground up rather than from the top down. And so when Patrick talks about a nation losing its strategic coherence, does that match what you see happening at the level of individual trust and community relationships?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if we look at what everyday Americans can observe and are experiencing viscerally, we observe a government where, first of all, it's often paralyzed and is taking no action at all, which is incredibly frustrating to Americans. And then when you look at what action proposals exist, a lot of times they are proposals that where you're fixing one thing, you're causing 5 other problems, right? Because the infrastructure of our government isn't in alignment. We're living in a mythology where the big pieces of our public policy, economic growth, individual prosperity, the environment and sustainability and foreign policy are treated as if they're competitive with one another. And what grand strategy does is it brings all of those pieces into alignment. Now, to get back to the essence of your question, when Americans are observing this incoherent government and observing that if we fix one thing, wait a minute, that has to be in competition with other things and we're losing something else. And that trust erodes, participation also erodes. So participation in government, participation in civic life, which means that elected officials become less accountable and we end up in a downward spiral. And then additionally, we observe that a small amount of really powerful people are using this incoherence to concentrate wealth and power for themselves. And when Americans are living, or anybody is living, in a context of economic scarcity, it's easy to be pitted against one another. It's easy to point the finger at the neighbor rather than looking at what is the systemic challenge. And that's intentional, right? And it's something that we can fix by being attentive to that first piece of grand strategy that Patrick mentioned, the economic engine, unrigging the economy and updating it, and then pairing that with some real grassroots on the ground organizing and interventions that we can do to bring people back together.
Yeah, it's such a really important through line for us to understand, because it seems like 2 separate conversations, right? To think about grand strategy versus grassroots trust building. But you've done a brilliant job of synthesizing those. Patrick, what do you see as the agreement, the coherence with the community and the trust building piece of the equation?
Yeah, so the coherence question, what we're in the United States of America, right? And our governing document is the Constitution. And the purposes of our nation are laid out in the preamble. And one of those is to promote the general welfare. It turns out we've got an economic theory right now that is not so interested in promoting the general welfare, right? And so you've got this coherence where what are some of our representatives and business leaders are saying should be the way our economy runs is not meeting that objective that's enshrined in our founding documents. There's this gap, there's this coherence gap, right? And grand strategy is all about aligning our economic engine, governing institutions, and foreign policy to meet the challenges of the day so that we can live out those preambular purposes, right? Provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity, right? So that is where there's supposed to be coherence. And as time moves on, even after, Eisenhower did a great job, but then it actually worked. And his grand strategy concluded in 1991, and we haven't done a new one. And so there's been all this dysfunction building up in the system to the point where we've got significant, 44% of Americans don't earn a living wage, right? That is not a system promoting the general welfare. And so what we need to do is use the tools of grand strategy to get rid of a lot of those kind of contradictions that Brandyn was just talking about, and put together a plan that allows us to do well as a country, and in the process do good for ourselves and for the rest of the world.
And when we see that the general welfare is not attended to, that people, as Patrick pointed out, are not earning enough money, even if they're working full-time jobs, just to meet the basics, and more Americans beyond that 44% can't afford a $1,000 expense, we see that folks can no longer see themselves. We can't see ourselves in the American story, at the center of the American story anymore. And so the political pendulum starts to swing back and forth. That administration didn't meet my basic needs, so let's try the other guy. Okay, well, that administration didn't meet my needs, so now the pendulum swings back to the other side. And in that, the general welfare, the day-to-day lived experience of Americans is getting lost.
What happens to a nation's options on the world stage when a meaningful share of its own population stops believing that the system works for them?
Oh, it's catastrophic, right? So I think context is really important. The United States at a population level is only 4% of the global population, right? China is practically a third. And so if we lose that internal coherence where the American people are benefiting from both the economic strategy and the national security strategy, then we're going to be weaker. And that's what we're experiencing right now. We're going to be divided, and China and Russia are taking advantage of that. To some extent, they're also promoting it, but they're also taking advantage of it very explicitly. So it's strategically critical to have that coherence, but then it's because we're such a small number of the global population, alliances are critical, right? If we don't have the ability to help meet the needs of other countries out there, Europe, Japan, developing world, and for them to see that we're taking their interests to heart and how we're starting to organize the economy, our economy, and the global economy, then we're not going to have those allies, and we're going to be left alone, and we're only 4% of the global population.
And Brandyn, I know you run the experiments on this looking internally. What does the data show about what happens to trust, like interpersonal trust and institutional trust, when people feel like the rules don't apply to them anymore, or that they've been left out of the story the country tells about itself?
Yeah, I mean, certainly trust both in government and in one another, our local institutions even erodes. And, one expression of that is that we saw in the 2024 election that more Americans didn't vote at all than voted for Donald Trump, right? Because the system isn't talking to them, for them, or about them. They're no longer at the center of the American story. And we also see at the community level, as I mentioned previously, when that when that economic scarcity is present, we create a ripe environment for strongman authoritarian tactics, for people who are intentionally looking to divide, to pit us against one another for artificially scarce resources, right? But we know that we can fix this. We can fix this both at the policy level by unrigging and updating the economy, and we can fix it at the ground level with a whole host of ways in which we can foster engagement across differences that move the dial on trust, on both civic trust and interpersonal trust. Social cohesion is the sort of fancy term for that. We know that we can move the dial by changing both our public policy and how we engage Americans with the policy and with each other.
And I can't wait to get into more of the specific, sort of the remedies, the interventions that are on the table. But I also, before we even do that, I would love to explore, how you think about the information environment specifically. Like in your experimental work, does the algorithmic and the platform context people are living inside show up as a variable?
Absolutely. We know that we are in bubbles in terms of social media, traditional media, and even our daily lives that we participate in because of how America is, how our communities are not necessarily fully integrated across race, class, political perspective, and because we've become increasingly disconnected from one another face to face, and are choosing communities that are more online or more based on sort of a subgroup that we belong to, right? So these factors compound one another, and the algorithms that we are engaged with in virtually every aspect of our lives, because we're so digitally present, for our social engagement, for our professional engagement. Those algorithms absolutely drive disconnection. That said, what contact theory tells us is that the mere presence of face-to-face engagement across differences, being part of a sports team where we're together with different people, or a community group, breaking bread with people who are different from us, just the mere fact that we engage offline with people across differences can help reduce the impact of those online algorithms and reduce polarization. So that is certainly a necessary step, but not sufficient. Just breaking bread with one another isn't going to solve all of our polarization problems, but it is one step to get off our screens and get in person with one another.
Yeah, and I also, in trying to make this sort of turn the curve transition into from sort of laying the table of the problems we're facing into talking about some of these remediations and interventions, one way I would love to introduce the framing is to think about this 250-year anniversary, because it seems like one of the challenges is there's real pressure to pick a side. Either you're all in on uncritical celebration, or you're cast as someone who's sort of rewriting history or being unpatriotic. And I just wonder, like, Patrick, like what does that forced binary cost the country strategically? Maybe not morally, maybe, but in terms of actual capacity and competitiveness over the long horizon.
Yeah, when you're forced to kind of, vote up or down on America's history, I think that's the wrong frame, right? I'm really excited about the American experiment. We've got, as long as we exercise our rights, we have the ability to change the institutions and systems of government to meet the needs of the current era and overcome the divisions that we're experiencing. So I celebrate the process that our founders gave us, right? That's what the Constitution is. And so that's to be celebrated. We're an imperfect society. We started imperfect. We're still imperfect. And we're continually working together to figure out how do we continually improve what the blessings of liberty mean. And that's a process that I celebrate. So I don't have,
Yeah.
I can recognize that we were imperfect, that we're not imperfect, but we've got a process that allows us to adapt and evolve. I just happen to know that grand strategy is the kind of the highest level of planning you can do, or strategic thinking you can do, with the process and the framework that the Constitution has given us. And we haven't done that in so long that things are breaking down. So I can be critical about that, but I also know we've got a process to fix it.
Yeah. And Brandyn, it feels like this is so relevant to what you were just saying too, in that sense of, kind of the polarization, but also even the mental binary, right? That's a cost that sort of forces us to be in this kind of like either or thinking that splinters us off instead of allowing us to have a more nuanced relationship with the people in our communities. Is that fair? And what do you see as the remediation to that?
Yeah, I think it's really fair. And, I think anniversaries are a great opportunity for reflection and looking at what is the whole of our history for the United States and what does that tell us about our opportunities for the future. So when I think about that complex history, I think both about the founding documents and the possibility that they laid out and about the incremental progress that we've made up into this point to make that a reality for more and more people, and how the pendulum has swung forward and back, right? And so when I think about our history, it is complicated, and we have we have a history of marginalization of large pieces of our residents of our community. And all of those people and all of their struggles are also part of the American story and all of the progress over time, right? So both the progress and what has pushed us at times backwards from everybody being able to access the American dream. And so part of what I think can move us forward is to look at our history in its wholeness and think about what can we do to sort of write that next chapter in such a way that gets us closer to the promise of the founding documents. And I think we actually have an opportunity to make a quantum leap forward. And so to your question about the false binaries, we do have, or the draw that we have to look at things as either or, we do have a lot of muscle memory in our culture and in our politics that is adversarial, that doesn't encourage us to look at the complexity and come together and make breakthrough solutions, but rather to pick a side and fight as a way of doing good. Now, there is a moment when strident advocacy is useful, and at times in our history that has helped expand the promise of the American dream. And there are moments when it paralyzes policymaking. There are moments when being divided against one another and fighting stridently is exactly what prevents us from shifting the status quo, because we are not able to see solutions that serve all of us and where our common interest lies. And so one of the interventions that we can do to help with that is to help folks come together across differences in order to connect on across surface differences in order to connect on shared values. So to move beneath that surface level where we're often pitted against one another, and to look at what are the shared values that bind us together. And then from those shared values, what are the policies that can actually serve the whole, both individual prosperity, growth for the country, and aggregating all the way up or across to sustainability and safety and security. And so we have a process that we use to help folks with that, built right into our organizing model. We have a thriving conversations process, which helps us get out of that sort of muscle memory of, sort of fixing the other person by stridently applying our opinion to them, and rather taking a step back and helping avoid. And so, of course, what happens when we do that is automatically the other person, sort of feels attacked and goes into fight, flight, or freeze mode, right? So then the conversation is essentially over. And if anybody listening or watching has had the experience of, oh, I know this person and I feel like I know that they're kind and I share values with them, but then we start talking about policy and it seems like I don't know this person anymore and I'm just hearing talking points from the internet or from TV, right? If
Right.
anybody's ever had that experience, that's what the Thriving Conversations process helps with. It helps us get out of those TV talking points. It helps us step back, move out of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, and get us into a place where we can connect on shared values and then create breakthrough solutions. And the grand strategy process, the grand strategic process that we will be operationalizing through our grand strategy working group provides a place for these more nuanced policy conversations where these different pieces of our public policy infrastructure can align, we can pressure test them, and we can operationalize them and as a practical matter by creating a real feedback loop to the ground that engages folks' opinions on the policy, their lived experience, and then engages them on the action of moving the policy forward.
That is 100% where I want you to go at both next. But I also want to ask you, Brandyn, if you have a favorite example that you would want to call to mind of a group sort of on the ground, a community that did form around a shared value, sort of figured out a way to build that connection and kind of grow that up through policy. Is there something that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, we were working with a particular community, a city and county, on their future planning process, using this sort of thriving conversations model that I described. And what we found when the process started was that folks showed up in the way that many folks listening or watching might observe on TV or on the internet when they see the contentious town halls, right? In the context of the loudest, squeakiest wheel is going to get the grease. So let me do good by being loud and squeaky, right? And adversarial. And what we were able to do was reset the sort of context and the reward system for folks in the room by having a backward and forward conversation about, well, why does policy get stuck? And if we are yelling at each other like this, who is benefiting? Are we getting anything done here, or are we stuck with the status quo that we might want to change? And then that opened up a room for folks to come together and create some breakthrough solutions. And folks who had sort of come in a very adversarial mode, yelling, all of the things that you've seen. Rolled up their sleeves, worked together on plotting land use for the future, came together on solutions, balanced difficult trade-offs, and left smiling and high-fiving and with concrete recommendations.
Wow.
So that's the kind of thing we want to do on the ground. And I think maybe Patrick has sort of a more policy-focused example.
Yeah, Patrick, I'd love to hear a policy-focused example. I'd also love to hear, how you think about that sort of scale level dynamic between, these kind of on the ground community level conversations and then thinking at the sort of macro high level about grand strategy. How do you reconcile those viewpoints and bring them together?
Yeah, I think the history of grand strategy is that it's been done in kind of smoky back rooms, right, by white men. And now we've got to open it up, right? And so the question is, how do you open it up while ensuring that it's got some coherence that's been hard earned over our 250 years, right? So that we're not just totally blank slating it, but we're saying, hey, look, we have learned. And so what our approach is to use processes like what Brandyn just talked about, but to make sure that the people in the room are from kind of three large groups. It's the grassroots folks that are coming together in their communities, combined with issue advocates kind of from our coalition, and then subject matter experts, right? And if the old way was maybe some subject matter experts informing some elected leaders, but everything being done in relative secret, right? The last grand strategy was classified for 25 years, right? So, if the new one needs to be collectively done, how do you create a representative group in the room that can stay on task, can absorb the lessons of the past, and bring those best practices forward into some type of coherent grand strategy? We've not done it in that way in the past. We've done grand strategy in the past, but this is our generation's update to that process, and that's where we need to go.
Yeah, I want to surface the thing that seems like a very obvious sort of tangent to this, but a really key piece, since we're talking on the Tech Humanist show, that a lot of the systems that now shape how people form their sense of shared reality, platforms, algorithms, AI mediated information, that those operate at national or global scale, but the trust that Brandyn is describing gets built at human scale, of course. So what does strategy do with that gap? And is closing it even a strategic problem, or does it require something strategy can't provide? Is this more to the point of these local discussions? How do we kind of mediate around that?
Brandyn, do you want to take a first crack at it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think this is one of the differentiating factors about our work in CGS, right?
Mhm.
We actually have very intentionally integrated grand strategy and policy making with on the ground engagement. And so Patrick was describing at the level of the Central Grand Strategy Working Group how we sit subject matter experts side by side with advocates and everyday people. Additionally, we are building a structure that helps us take that central sort of national body all the way to the ground in local communities. So that includes working through our partners who have their own constituencies and memberships and people that they engage with on the ground. And it also includes building our own civic infrastructure, investing in people who live in local communities, as organizers, as folks who are bringing people together across differences and are building power together in such a way that aggregates from the local level to state and national and is connected.
And this isn't anything necessarily all that new. You look at the Obama campaigns, they were all about organizing and building power collectively. Graham Plattner was just on another podcast, Jon Stewart's, saying that that's one of the big
A little bit bigger podcast.
Another podcast saying the exact same thing, that his campaign is about organizing people. And so it's really critical to have those networks just expand, right? And so we're going to iteratively expand our own where there are gaps, and then connect with other groups that have their own infrastructure where there's sufficient alignment. So I think this is the way. It's messy, but it's that's politics, right? We need to kind of rebuild some of the muscle memory of how you do representative democracy, and that means talking to people one-on-one.
And as somebody who has worked on a couple of presidential campaigns and in politics for over 20 years, one of the things that I have observed is that what electoral infrastructure does is drop people into communities, right? Drop staff into communities and pulls them back out after election day. So what we are doing is taking that style of grassroots community organizing and empowerment, and after election day, rather than pulling the rug out from under it, we are actually expanding on it, using it as a way to continue to build the power of everyday people to engage with their elected officials and hold them accountable after election day and make sure that the policy moves through.
Yeah. What about the global flourishing goals and the Right the Future initiative? What is the idea there? How does it relate to this idea of bottom-up patriotism?
Yeah, I would say there are a couple of consistencies between the Global Flourishing Goals and the Right the Future campaign and what we are doing with CGS. The first is alignment. Through the Global Flourishing Goals, all other sort of goal sets cohere, right? So, for example, if we look just at GDP or just at the SDGs, we often get incoherence, right? You can have a high GDP and you can have a lot of poverty in the country at the same time. You can be working on one SDG and unintentionally compromising progress on the other. So the GFGs are meant to be the next evolution of the UN SDGs and can subsume and cohere these other goal sets, much in the same way that grand strategy is, and a grand strategic approach is all about aligning our different big pieces of government, our different big policy areas so that they're coherent. And the Right the Future campaign is a way that we connect everyday people on the ground and leaders from multiple sectors to the process of what does it look like to implement the GFGs, right? Like, so the GFGs are they're five big goals that are going to be they're going to look different across cultures and across communities as to how they might be implemented, and there are going to be some through lines. So what the Right the Future campaign invites is for everyday people to imagine what would it take, what would be the enabling conditions to, for example, make it so that everybody has a reasonable standard of living or that everybody has a sense of purpose. And so you can see that, of course, we are very focused in CGS of making sure as a practical policy related matter that everyone has a reasonable standard of living. If we unrig and update the economy in the manner that we plan to, 90% of people will get a significant pay raise. Right? So that's just a simple example of what does it mean to operationalize a reasonable standard of living through policy. And like the work that we're doing to feed information from the ground into the Grand Strategy Working Group and then create a feedback loop that goes on in perpetuity to make sure that our policy proposals are relevant and resonant with everyday people, the Right the Future campaign is another mechanism for people to say, okay, what does this big goal look like in my community? What is this big thing about making sure everybody has a positive sense of mental and physical health? Like, all right, what am I going to do about that in my community tomorrow? It gives people an opportunity to do that envisioning, to come together on shared values and come up with concrete solutions that we can actually move forward through the policy process.
I love this whole discussion. It's so funny. As I listen to both of you, incredible experts in your fields and incredible committed public servants, thinking about this and talking about these plans and these mechanisms by which you gather all this information, what I keep hearing is so parallel to what we talk about within tech humanism, within, sort of strategy at the business level, at the organizational level. And it has to do with thinking at multiple scales, at thinking about the big picture, as well as thinking about those individual human touch points and how things really live for people. And it has to do with trying to explode binaries and thinking about, more nuance and trying to understand what the realities are instead of being forced into assumptions. There's so many parallels, and I'm so heartened to hear how they play out in the way that you're discussing them. Just to sort of wrap up, I know I want to respect your time and let you cut loose to the busy work I know you have ahead of you. But if you were just to close in the manner of the show, we like to end on a hopeful note. And I think it's only appropriate for us to be hopeful about this country for the next 250 years. So wondering across the long horizon, what would it take in your viewpoint for America to actually become ready for its next 250 years? And what gives each of you real grounded hope that that is possible? Brandyn, you want to start with Patrick, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll kick off. So for me, surviving the next 250 years is going to mean that we really live into our constitutional framework, and really be active as citizens, but also all the way through at every level, right? And that's going to mean that we move away from kind of these perfect ideologies that we've developed over the last 40, 50 years and be much more practical about what are the solutions to concrete problems that we're facing today and what works in reality. And in order to harmonize all of those different elements and kind of at a minimum do no harm to other elements, you're going to need a framework for executing that. That's what grand strategy delivers at the end of the day. We over the last 50 years, we've been told that government is the problem, right? That's just not the case. Government provides the framework to enable the freedoms that our country was built around. And I think grand strategy is one of those frameworks that allows us to secure those freedoms over the next 250 years. So if we're going to get through there, we're going to have to be much more conscious about why we're doing things that we're doing and how they're benefiting up and down the system, and making sure that we're living out those shared values that Brandyn was talking about, the shared purposes in the preamble to the Constitution. If we can do that, then I think the next 250 years looks great.
Brandyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a unique window of opportunity in these 3 years to set us up for the next 250 or 47, as the case may be, once the 3 years pass, right? We are in a very, very unique political moment where we are at a moment of extreme generational challenge and at the same time, generational opportunity, where I think there really is an opportunity for folks to transform and take a quantum leap forward towards the sort of ideals laid out. So what does that look like, right? I want to invite everybody who's listening and watching to connect with us, to connect on LinkedIn, to come sign up at the website. The thing that gives me the most hope is when we get on the ground in communities and we see people and what their capacity is to come together across differences and create change. I am always blown away every time we're able to engage folks in the thriving conversations process and the breakthrough solutions that are possible. And so I'm super hopeful that the infrastructure that we are in the process of creating can help connect folks who are already doing that on the ground in their communities, invest in folks to continue to build on their capacities, and scale solutions beginning in this 2026 election cycle, and carrying through to a new presidency in 2029. So we will have opportunities for folks to engage with organizing their own communities, organizing their affinity groups, working with business leaders, working with leaders across multiple sectors. So at any level, both folks who are leaders and have their hands on the levers of power and folks who are leaders on the ground in their community, because we believe that everybody is a leader in one way or another. So we'll have opportunities to engage with skill building with the elections, and we really want to invite everybody into that. And I think there's no limit to what we can accomplish when we engage together and are brave enough to come together across differences to solve big problems. America has shown us that again and again, and I think this is a moment where we can show it one more time.
Oh, love that. Hey, give us the URL or a contact information for where folks can go if they want to follow along, sign up, reach out to you all. What are the best places for people to go online?
Great. We can put it in the show notes, but it's www.ccgstrategy.org. And we'll put that in the show notes as well as other information.
Yeah. Yeah. Good for listeners to hear it directly. So we will make sure that that's there. But man, Patrick, Brandyn, thank you so much for joining us on this show. I am gratified. You give me hope that there's a great future in front of us, and because of the work that you two are doing and the work that folks on the ground and all the communities that are participant and all those leaders, every one of the people who are involved at that leadership level, which is everyone,
Yeah.
It's
well,
so
it's all about
encouraging.
humanism. It's all about humanism at the end of the day. So
100%.
thank you for leading in your
100%.
space as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kate.
Patrick Doherty, Brandyn Keating, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Tech Humanist Show. This episode was produced and edited by Thrive Loud Productions, with research by Ashley Robinson and Aaron Daughtry of Interrobang. You can find more information about the show's guests and links to their projects at thetechhumanist.com, where you can also find more episodes, or you can subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Special thanks to all of our guests for lending their voices to help make the future a brighter place. I'm Kate O'Neill. You've been listening to The Tech Humanist Show from KO Insights.